On the day of my grandfather's funeral, my sister Jessica clapped her hands with a big smile and said,
Finally, today is a celebration. That annoying old geezer is finally gone.
"What? How could you?" Just as I was about to grab her, Jessica shoved a piece of paper in front of my face.
Look at this. It's the deed to the land that the old geezer owned. As if today, this $5 million land belongs to my husband and me. Oh, and by the way, Grandma and Nancy's house is on our land. You get what I'm saying, right?
Jessica smiled eerily, then her expression turned cold.
I'm telling you to move out. All I want is the $5 million land. I don't need a 90-year-old grandma or you.
No way.
What a face. No matter how much you scream, the facts won't change. My future is bright and rosy now.
As I trembled with anger, Grandma gently placed her hand on my shoulder.
Nancy, it's okay. Let's give up the house.
"Grandma?" Jessica grinned with a nasty smile at Grandma's words.
That's right. You bugs who can't do anything should disappear from my life quickly.
She laughed loudly and laughed with a satisfied look on her face. As I stood there in shock, Grandma smiled calmly, just as she always did. "Grandma, are you really okay with this?" But the moment our eyes met, I realized that her smile was different from usual, and I felt a chill run down my spine.
Yes, it's fine, because those two are already finished.
My name is Nancy. I still live with my family, even now that I'm an adult and married. I live with my husband, David, my grandfather, and my grandmother. I lost my parents in an accident when I was young, and my grandparents raised me. My grandparents, who raised me, had grown older, and even though they are still relatively young, it would probably be more convenient for them to live together. More than anything, I wanted to give back a little for all they've done for me and help make their lives a bit easier, so I chose to live with them. I take care of all the household chores and look after my grandparents, even though both my husband and I work full-time. The deal was that I would cover the living expenses, and David reluctantly agreed to live with us. Whenever we got bonuses, we would go on trips with my grandparents. When we went out to eat or travel with my grandparents, David rarely joined us, so it was usually just the three of us. Even though I thought he should spend more time with us since we were married, I figured he was already making an effort by living with us, so I didn't say anything and let him do as he pleased. I thought things were going well. I was happy. But this happy life was about to crumble so easily. That day, as usual, David didn't join us when we went out to eat with my grandparents and did some shopping at the mall. On our way home, I hurriedly bought some small gifts for David, who was waiting alone at home, and when we got back, I saw a familiar car parked in front of the house. It was a bright pink compact car. It was Jessica's car. I had an older sister, Jessica, who was 3 years older than me, but she disliked our grandparents. Ever since she was in elementary school, Jessica disliked having our grandparents come to sports day or parents' day. While everyone else had young, stylish parents, she felt embarrassed to be the only one with elderly grandparents. On top of that, the lunches our grandparents made were usually traditional, and she felt embarrassed comparing them to her classmates' colorful, cute lunches. Jessica left home as soon as she graduated from high school, as if she was escaping. It was unusual for her to come to the house. My grandparents seemed surprised, but they were happy that Jessica, whom they hadn't seen since our wedding, had come by. But this unexpected visit wasn't a good one. As we approached the house, we saw Jessica coming out of the front door, holding David's hand. My grandparents and I instinctively hid behind the garden hedge so that they wouldn't see us. The two of them, holding hands and acting all la-vie-de-vie without a care in the world, shared a goodbye kiss as Jessica got into her car. I instinctively took a picture of them. As the three of us stood there in shock, Jessica waved goodbye to David with a reluctant smile and drove off without noticing us. David also didn't notice us and went back into the house. It felt like time had stopped. No one said a word or moved an inch. After a while, my grandparents simply said to me,
You should do what you think is best, Nancy.
and just like always, I walked through the front door with a bright voice, saying, I'm home. I wanted to believe that I had seen something wrong, but the photos on my phone confirmed the truth. After some deliberation, 3 days later, I decided to check David's phone while he was in the shower. Sneaking a peek at his messaging app, I found the messages between him and Jessica still there. I love you, you're so cute, I can't live without you. Words I hadn't heard from him in years. I felt more irritation and disgust than sadness. I couldn't understand why David would cheat with his wife's sister or why Jessica would go after her sister's husband. It was sickening. On top of that, they were bad-mouthing me and my grandparents. As I recorded the screen on my phone, I made a firm decision. I was going to get a divorce. How could the happy days I thought I had be destroyed so easily? But once that feeling of disgust took root, it only grew. Just as I decided to get a divorce, David brought it up himself. He gave a few plausible reasons, but when I confronted him about his affair with Jessica, he admitted it right away. To make matters worse, Jessica had the nerve to say,
We're sisters, aren't we? If weird rumors spread, Grandma and Grandpa would be hurt.
She demanded I not ask for alimony. I was furious at her selfishness, but it was Jessica. If it had been some stranger, I wouldn't have listened, but this is my sister. We grew up together and had so many happy memories. After thinking it over, I agreed to Jessica's request. After that, David left to live with Jessica. Once he was gone, I cut off contact with both of them. Now it was just the three of us, but we were living peacefully and happily. I was beginning to heal from the pain of my divorce from David. 2 years after David left, my grandfather passed away. He suddenly collapsed at home and never recovered. My grandmother and I were heartbroken, unable to prepare for such a sudden loss. But we pulled ourselves together, with the help of our neighbors, to hold a funeral. My grandfather was well known, having served as the Homeowners Association president, and many people came to mourn his passing and offer their support. I had contacted Jessica and David, but they showed no intention of helping with the funeral. However, I was too overwhelmed to pay attention to Jessica and David, so I didn't even know if they attended the funeral. After we somehow managed to get through the funeral, as we were taking a breather, 2 familiar faces approached us.
Hey, long time no see. You look like you've aged a bit.
David and Jessica, you came?
Of course, we're family, aren't we?
It was the first time I'd seen them in 2 years, and they both seemed strangely cheerful. I thought it was inappropriate given that my grandfather had just passed, but I didn't have the energy to say anything. They hadn't been around during any of the preparations. Where had they been? Their cheerful approach right after everything was over irritated me. My grandmother didn't seem pleased either, and her brows furrowed slightly.
Finally, that old geezer is gone.
Jessica, how can you say that?
Why not? It's the truth. I was always so embarrassed. All my friends had stylish, cute parents, and why did I have to be stuck with such old grandparents? I've hated it for so long, but at least Grandpa finally served his purpose.
Jessica proudly pulled out a piece of paper. It was the deed to the land that my grandfather had owned. My grandfather's family home was an old house with a large piece of land. The total value of the land was said to be around $5 million. Jessica had always wanted that land.
I wish Grandpa would just die already. That old geezer is stubborn.
In the past, there were many times when she said things that were so inappropriate that my grandparents could never hear them. Whenever she did, I would scold her, but Jessica never seemed to care.
Stop pretending to be such a goody-goody. It really pisses me off.
There were even times when she'd lash out at me in response. At some point, David had found out about my grandfather's land. While we were still married, he asked me about it multiple times, but I always dodged his questions. There was a time when David, nervously asking where the deed was, made it clear he was after my grandfather's land, and I was shocked. That memory flashed through my mind. Jessica and David must have found that deed somehow, and now they were standing in front of me, grinning triumphantly. They planned to take all of my grandfather's land for themselves.
Look at this. See, it's the deed to the land. That $5 million is ours now.
Don't say such selfish things.
Oh, stop yapping. No matter how much you bark, it's already ours. You know, Grandma and Nancy's house is on our land. So hurry up and move out, will you? All I want is the $5 million worth of land. I don't need a 90-year-old grandma hanging around.
How could you? After everything they've done for you, how can you say something like that?
You're still the same, aren't you? I've always hated how you pretend to be the perfect little goody-goody, Nancy. But now you can say whatever you want. It doesn't bother me one bit because I've taken your husband and your house.
I was left speechless by Jessica's words. A mix of sadness, anger, and shock churned inside me, leaving me unable to respond. Just as I instinctively clenched my fists and took a step toward Jessica, my grandmother stopped me.
Nancy, wait a moment.
Grandma. Even after hearing Jessica's cruel words, my grandmother maintained her usual calm expression as she looked at Jessica and spoke.
Jessica, I understand. If you're going to go that far, you can have the land.
Wait, Grandma, are you sure?
Yes, it's fine. If she wants it that badly, let her have it. We can find another place to live. But in exchange, you must give up any other inheritance. With $5 million worth of land, I'm sure you won't mind if Nancy and I keep the rest.
Fine by me. There's probably nothing valuable in the rest of the inheritance anyway. So, Grandpa's land is ours now. Once you get that, hurry up and move out. I'm being generous, so I'll give you a month. Use that time to find another rundown shack to live in.
With that, Jessica turned her back on us, looking pleased with herself. David, trailing behind her, had a smug grin on his face as well.
We're rich now.
I overheard him telling Jessica. As I watched them walk away, my anger remained. Not only had they forcibly taken my grandfather's land, but they had also insulted my grandmother, who had raised them. I was seething with rage. I couldn't understand why my grandmother had let Jessica get away with it. But then, my grandmother let out a soft chuckle, almost too quiet for me to hear.
Those two are finished.
She whispered, just loud enough for me to catch. Grandma, what do you mean?
That land, you see, was something your grandfather and I were discussing what to do with it.
Grandma, smiling like a child who had just pulled off a successful prank, explained everything to me. It turns out that the $5 million land was valued at that price when it was first purchased. Since then, however, the economic situation had changed, and the land's value had plummeted. But the value drop wasn't the worst part. Industrial waste had been illegally dumped on the property. With the waste there, no one would want to live on or buy the land. The company responsible for the dumping had gone bankrupt, and when we consulted the local authorities, they said there was no immediate danger to the surrounding residents, so they didn't take any action. In the end, we were left to handle the cleanup ourselves, which would cost a fortune. And even if we did clean it up, the land's reputation was ruined, so it would be nearly impossible to find a buyer. To make matters worse, because of the land's size, the taxes were enormous. As my grandparents got older, managing the land became increasingly difficult for them, and instead of being a source of income or an asset, it turned into a burden, costing them a fortune in taxes just to hold on to it. My grandmother had been struggling with what to do after my grandfather passed away. At that time, Jessica had asked to see the deed to the land. With everything going on with the funeral, I hadn't even realized Jessica had come over. My grandmother, sensing Jessica's intentions, had played along, pretending to be fooled and showing her the deed. Jessica, who looked pleased as she checked the deed, did exactly what Grandma had suspected. She stole the deed while we were away. Despite all the love my grandmother had poured into Jessica, she had only ever received cruelty in return. It wasn't that she expected anything in return for her love, but dealing with constant verbal abuse had worn her down. Just because they were her grandchildren didn't mean they were automatically lovable. Even when you're related by blood, you're still separate individuals. There's no rule that says you have to love someone. Jessica used to be adorable, but the repeated insults and her attitude of only showing up when money was involved had soured things. Apparently, Jessica had come by multiple times when I wasn't around, begging my grandparents for money. And on top of that, she even had an affair with David.
I've been patient all this time, but maybe it's time for them to face the consequences.
Grandma said, her smile not reaching her eyes as she looked at me. I had never seen her like this before. Later on, Jessica and David inherited the land without any issues, but they were shocked to find out that the land they had counted on had no buyers or renters at all. For a while, they kept calling me and Grandma repeatedly. I listened to their voicemails.
No one wants land with garbage buried on it. What's the point of owning this? It's useless. How could you do this to us? We're family.
This isn't what we agreed on. You said the land would be valuable. Hand over the inheritance money as alimony.
Their voices were full of anger, but both Grandma and I ignored them. Jessica and David didn't know about the taxes, and when they received the notice of the enormous tax bill, they panicked. David, who thought he'd be getting a lot of money, had remarried Jessica, but now the land wasn't generating any income, and they had to pay way more in taxes than they expected. He started pressuring Jessica for a divorce, claiming this wasn't what he signed up for, and their relationship became increasingly strained. After countless unanswered calls to me and Grandma, Jessica finally ambushed Grandma at the grocery store she frequented and tearfully pleaded with her.
I can't pay this kind of money. Grandma, what am I supposed to do?
Fortunately, a neighbor who saw the altercation stepped in and held Jessica back while another called the police, preventing the situation from escalating further. Because of this incident, Grandma and I decided to prioritize our safety. Using the money my grandfather had left us, we built a house far away from Jessica and David. The new house is smaller than our old one, but it's just the right size for the two of us. The location is convenient, and our neighbors are all wonderful people. I'm still living happily and enjoying life with my beloved grandma.